Hi everyone, it's Miss Kimmy. Today we're going to go over chapter 18. This is Intro to the Human Body. This chapter is going to be very important for you to navigate the course going forward. There's a couple of things here that I want you to pay extra attention to just because this is where students mess up when trying to learn and study for the MLEX. Now here you can see that we're starting with terminology, cells, tissues, and the body compass, but medical terminology is going to be your best friend moving forward. Whether you use a couple of sheets just to practice your medical terminology daily, I can guarantee you that it'll be a great help, especially moving forward towards anatomy, kinesiology, and pathology. Right, so of course, here's our learning objectives, right? You need to know what anatomy is. Anatomy is going to be the gross structure of the body, whereas physiology is what the body does. Homeostasis is how we get our balance in the body, and then of course we're going to discuss medical terminology, cells, tissues, and membranes. Right, so as stated, right, the basic terminology, which is that medical terminology, is the basis. This is the foundation of building your house of knowledge when it comes to anatomy, physiology, and pathology. Most of the terms are going to be in Greek or Latin, and this is going to be able to retain repetition. For instance, my favorite word is probably the easiest word is the word itis. Itis is always going to mean inflammation. So as long as I want to say this is probably the easiest one to learn, right? But as long as you begin to have that repetition, you should be good for the MLEX. Now, anatomy, as we said, right, this is the study of, the gross body or the structures of the body and how they're, related to each other. So for instance, if I have, right, let's say this is my heart, right, my heart is going to be connected to what? Veins and arteries. And so anatomy is the study of this heart right here and what is connected to it. However, physiology is more defined in what the function of the body is. It's individual parts, right? So for instance, the physiology of the heart is to beat, and the physiology of the arteries and the veins is to provide blood flow. Right? These are, you're going to be asked a couple of questions when thinking about anatomy and physiology. Remember, physio, how it works, anatomy, what it is. Homeostasis is our body's way of maintaining balance within the body, right? So the tendency of the body's internal environment to remain relatively constant, right, with a narrow range of change. So for instance, if it's a very hot and sunny day, right, I'm going to sweat so that I can cool down, right? Why am I going to sweat? Because it is hot. So with medical terminology, right, we have, think back to basic English class, right? We have our root words, our prefixes and suffixes, and this is what we should consider, moving forward. This isn't as hard as we feel it could be. But even if it is that hard, we can do hard things. For instance, right, our root word is also known as a stem, and it's going to combine two words connecting a vowel. For instance, in the example of cardiovascular, the vowel is going to be the O, cardiovascular, right? So that would be, cardio would be the root word. Now, with the prefix, right, that's going to be placed in front of the word, it's going to change its meaning. It's going to give it, our idea of what to look for. For instance, when we have something that is precancerous, it's right before it's cancerous. So, or it's relatively low cancerous, right? So this is before something goes really bad. Our suffixes are going to change the meaning of the word at the end of the word, right? So a big emphasis on the end, right? And this is going to change the word's meaning. It could change an adjective or a noun. For instance, appendectomy, right? Which in that situation, the suffix would be otomy. right? Suffixes can indicate, of course, value, quality, action, relation, such as gender, size, or number and type, right? So in appendectomy, we're typically thinking about something happening to what? The appendix, right? So that root word append, right? Ectotomy, meaning surgery happening in this area. So we have, this is probably one of my favorite things to talk to. If you haven't been in my class yet, we should probably all know this a little bit. These are the levels of organization. Before I become a person, before I'm a full organism, I need to go through this level of organization. So typically, we organize from least to most complex, but don't be surprised if they ask you to put it from complex to least complex. You should be able to know how to do that. So for instance, here we have chemicals, right? Chemicals, of course, we have our CHON, right? So CHON stands for carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, right? We also have water, right? Because, typically how I love this, but it's not my favorite. Why? Because we're not talking about, we're talking about atoms. Atoms become molecules, molecules become chemicals, and so on and so forth, right? So very, very simple. You want to think very way back before we ever become a cell, right? To become a cell, we need all of these components. We need chemical components to become a cell. Right, so our cells, of course, the cellular level is going to include, right, our basic living, smallest structure to build apart the body, right? So a cell, can have a very specific job. For instance, blood cells or erythrocytes, right? Their job is to carry oxygen. Very simple. Right? Whereas, our white blood cells, their job is to defend us. Very simple. So once we have that basic little knowledge about what that cellular level is, we're going to go to tissues. Why? So several cells are going to come together and work together. They have something in common. So then that will become a tissue. Once several tissues have something in common, right, they want to work together, they're going to become an organ. When several organs come together to work together, they become an organ system. And we have all of these organ systems, our body at the chemical, cellular, tissue, organ system level, right, are all working together. We finally have us. What are we? An organism, right? So that's going to be, just very simply like how we divide to the most simplest form of our existence. Give me a second. I don't know why it's doing that. Okay, thank you. Right, so here's a really, really cute picture. If you can look at it, right, this is what I was talking about a little bit earlier. Over here we have our atoms, right? Our atoms are going to join together and they're going to create molecules. What's a molecule? H2O is a molecule. So water is a molecule. Those molecules, not just H2O, several other molecules are going to come together and create what are known as protein filaments. Protein filaments are going to be very important to understand things like kinesiology, especially when we're thinking about the sacromere. Right? Why? Because these filaments are going to slide around each other and they're going to create, contractions. Right? Then we finally have, right, this is going specifically for the heart, right? These protein filaments come together, they hang out, and at the cellular level, heart muscle cells are going to join and, create the official heart muscle cell, right? So those protein filaments join and create a heart muscle cell. I said that a little backwards. I apologize, right? I'll just repeat it one more time. The protein filaments are going to join together to create a heart muscle cell. Now, when those cells start joining together, then we finally have cardiac muscle or the heart muscle tissue. Right? So muscle is a type of tissue, guys, right? Then once those heart muscle tissues start joining together, we finally have the functional organ that is the heart, right? It's going to help us beat and contract. Now, the crazy thing about this is before we even get to, the whole system, right, we're going to take it a little back to those molecules, right? Whatever molecule and decides, right? For instance, let's say I need 5 carbons, 6 hydrogens, and 2 oxygens, right? For a specific protein filament, it's going to change what the cell is, right? Maybe I don't even need a protein filament. So then I'm going to gather other molecules to create a completely different cell before I start, right, to create an organ. This at the molecular, even at the anatomical level, right? Atomic level, right, are going to define what it is that my body is going to need and what that need is going to do, right? So for instance, the protein filaments become typically a muscle cell, in this case a heart muscle cell, and then so on and so forth. It's going to build upon that, right? So then after the heart is going to help with several, right, organ systems, right? What is it going to help with? It's going to help with our integumentary system, our skeletal, our muscle, our nervous, our endocrine, cardiovascular is probably the most common. Why? Because I need a ready flow of blood to be able to perform all the functions of those other organ systems. But now the heart is going to be recognized in the organ system, specifically the cardiovascular system, right? Why? Because that is its main function, its main job. Even though all the other organ systems are benefiting from the heart, right? The main job of the heart is to pump blood. Right? Once all these organ systems come together, of course, I have me, a beautiful organism that can live, procreate if I wish, and keep doing massages. Now, cells are the smallest, very minuscule. I need a microscope to see a cell, right? I need a microscope to see a cell because they're so small, but they're a completely functional unit, and they can exist as a self-sustaining entity. They can kind of live on their own if they wanted to, right? You would be surprised at how many cells go unnoticed. Right? On my foot, for instance, if I take a nice little swab of foot, I can see dead cells under a microscope. Or I can see, even if I take a little bit, of a living sample from me, I can see a living cell, even though it's separated from my body. Why is that? Because of that chemical level we discussed earlier. These are going to be known as building blocks of the body, the cells are, right? They carry out certain functions for their own survival. They can move substances across their cellular membranes, and some cells require energy expenditure, right? So they're going to use energy. What is that energy going to be known as? ATP, adenosine triphosphates, right? Thank God we don't have to go into what that chemical structure looks like, but the cells are going to use that as energy. For instance, when I tell you guys, hey, what do you remember from high school? And everyone says, oh, well, mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell, right? The reason why is because mitochondria is going to produce ATP, so it can use that energy. But some cells, strangely, do not need to do that. They don't need to expend energy, right? So there's different parts of the cells, right? Cells have certain projections, right? So these projections are going to help the cell move around, right? So for instance, we have microvilli, cilia, and flagella. Now, if you are unfamiliar with the terms, don't worry, we'll talk a little bit about flagella. So for instance, in spermatozoa or sperm cells, right, there's a little tail, and that tail is going to help the sperm cell reach the egg so you can be born. Right? Now, the microvilli, these are more hair-like structures, and they're kind of going to finger wave things so that they can move. The cilia is very similar as well, a little bit more hair-like, a little bit more protruding, and it is also going to help move. Those projections are for movement, right? Now we're going out in to describe and explain this, right? Now, that is part of the cell membrane. Inside the cell, kind of like in a bit of an inside in between, right? We have what is known as the cytoplasm, right? So if this is my cell and I have, a bunch of little microvilli, right? The cytoplasm would be located right inside. So things inside the cell aren't just bumping into each other. No, they need to stay in place. And they're going to stay in place because of the cytoplasm. The cytoplasm is like a little glue that's going to hold all the cell's organs inside. Now, the cell is just almost like an organism, right? Except, we have systems and they don't. Why? Because every cell has its own organs, and those organs are going to be known as organelles, right? And they all have specific functions, just like how our organs do, right? There's a couple of differences between the few, right? But just so that we know what is going on with the organelles, right? We have the ER, the endoplasmic reticulum. This is smooth or rough. Right now, rough ER is going to contain what is known as ribosomes. Ribosomes are always, if you ever look at a model, ribosomes are going to be like little rough protrusions upon that rough ER. That's why we call it rough, because it doesn't even look pleasant. Moving on, we have the Golgi body. Continuing, we also have, right, the mitochondria, lysosomes, centrioles, and the nucleus. Now, just to kind of, get into it, the nitty-gritty, right? Ribosomes specifically will produce proteins. The mitochondria is going to produce ATP, power, otherwise known as energy. The endoplasmic reticulum is going to transport those proteins to that Golgi body, and the Golgi body is going to modify it, right? They're going to modify and process those proteins, send it over, to the lysosomes where the leftover protein is, right? The lysosomes are great. They're a little bit kind of like a cleanup crew. They kills everything that we don't need. The centrioles are going to make cell division possible. And the nucleus is, of course, our DNA. That is where everything that cell specifically needs to do and produce, that is where that is going to happen. Right, so here are the specific parts of the cell, right? As you can see here, we're going to start, right? That's that cilia, those hair-like protrusions that are going to help the cell move on. Moving on, we have the smooth endoplasmic reticulum. It looks smooth, but then over here at this side, right, we have rough endoplasmic reticulum, and it's having those ribosomes on. Why? Because ribosomes are going to help produce proteins, right? So it's going to help it process it. Now, where we can't see is a little bit of the cytoplasm that's holding everything together. The cytoskeleton is what's keeping up the cells. Here are the centrioles that are going to help divide the cell. Mitochondria producing energy, beautiful nucleus. Right, the nucleic membrane, right? The nucleic membrane is going to protect the nucleus and also allow for transmissions to be possible. The nucleolus, you want to think about it as more of the brain of the cell. Here's Golgi body. As I said, Golgi body is going to modify those proteins. Lysosome, right? The lysosome is going to kill leftover proteins. And then finally, our beautiful cell membrane. Our beautiful cell membrane, of course, is there to protect and allow certain things to go in. For instance, our cells actually do need water. And so the cell membrane is going to allow that water to come in, but not too much, because if it comes in too much, then it could explode. That is known as hypertonicity, or hypotonicity, my bad, hypotonicity. right? But right now we don't need to learn about that. That's just a little tease. Right, here is a bit of the cellular process, right? So we were talking about energy or cell membrane activity is not necessarily required for this process. Why? Because it is passive, right? It means this is going to happen even if I want it to or not. It's just gonna happen. It's passive, right? There are a couple different types of the cellular process. For instance, we have diffusion, right? Diffusion is the movement of molecules from a high level of concentration to a low level of concentration until the concentrations kind of equalize. So a good example of diffusion, for instance, would be if I had a nice little perfume bottle and I spray it out. You know, in that area that I sprayed, it's going to smell very strong, but then it's going to go away because it's going to go throughout the room. That is a process of diffusion. Osmosis is the movement of water from an area of low concentration to high concentration, or until the concentrations equalize. There are processes of osmosis if you like to make drinks, if you're into mixology and you can see it, where kind of like, you know, denser liquid will kind of flow to the bottom even though there was already liquid in the cup, right? That is very, you know, subtle. It's not necessarily true osmosis, but it is a visual representation. Filtration, right? To filter. Very simple, right? This is the movement of water across the cell membrane due to pressure, right? So if you have a water filter, right, I can't just put a water filter in a still bottle of water and think it's going to do everything it's going to do. No, I have to put water through that filter so that it can actually work. Here is diffusion in liquid. This is specifically, right, you put a lump of sugar in water and then over time it's going to dissipate and go throughout the entire water until I have sugary water. Here is osmosis. This understanding is a little bit complex, but don't worry, I'm right here. Right here on the left, right, we have low sugar concentration, but on the right we have a high sugar concentration. Right, so they're going to pass through each other. Why? Because, you know, this kind of needs to equalize a little bit. However, here on the right, we kind of have the same amounts, but the water isn't going to necessarily like chill, right? Why? Because things are going to go through the membrane, right? And that's specifically what is going to go through the membrane is the water. It is the water, not the sugar that's going to go through it, right? Now, typically, in this type of example, don't worry, you're not going to be tested on it too much on the NLEX, but it is a good thing to note, right? When we have a membrane, the membrane is trying to specifically get things like water. It needs to be able to filter out other substances that aren't necessary. So this is why we do speak about osmosis. Now, the cellular process that is active is going to require energy, right? So this is where molecules are going to move against their concentration gradient. What does that mean, right? I have a specific concentration. It might be very thick, right? But the molecules are going the other way. So if I was a little fish in a river, right, and the river is is pushing me back, I'm swimming against the current. Right? That is active, right? I'm not floating down the river like in passive. No, I'm actively swimming against the current, right? That is the biggest difference, right? To swim against the current, I need to use energy. For our molecules to move across the cell membrane, they need to move energy. Why? Because they're going against concentration gradient. This is going from an area of low concentration to high concentration, right? Typically passive, right? This is like passive is flowing down a river. Active is swimming against the river, right? Active processes are also known as active transport. We have different forms of active transport. For instance, we have pumps and we have vesicles. For instance, a pump is like the sodium potassium pump. This is actually going to help, you know, things like action, occur because we need some sodium in our bodies to be able to do what we need to do, right? So the transport by pumps, that is a carrier molecule that is located on the cell membrane, and it's going to let things come into the cell, such as, for instance, ions, right? So just to say that one more time, the carrier molecules located on the cell membrane is going to function as a pump to transport ions, right? Now, transportation by vesicles is a little bit different, right? These are small little sacs or spherical sacs that transport substances into and out of the cell. Into the cell is going to be known as endocytosis. Out of the cell is going to be called exocytosis. Exocytosis is going to exit the cell, right? So through endocytosis, right, this is when the cell's cytoskeleton pulls apart the cell wall, and it's going to surround a specific molecule and pull it inside, right? Now, phagocytosis is cell eating, right? So that molecule is recognized, digested, and then released through exocytosis. However, pinocytosis is cell drinking, right, which is a similar process to phagocytosis in, for instance, that the cytoskeleton is going to pull apart the cell wall, but the target substance specifically is liquid, right? So with pino, think wino, like wine, right? And then phagocytosis is, of course, eating. Pinocytosis is cell drinking, right? Through vesicles, right? Vesicles are membrane enclosed, right? So they're enclosed by the membrane, and they're going to be transporting things outside the cell, right? This is going to be important. Vesicles are going to secrete. That word is a key word. Why? Because it's going to secrete things like digestive enzymes, hormones, mucus, and even neurotransmitters. So information. Tissues. Tissues are a group of similar cells, of course, that come together, right? And they're going to perform specific functions, right? Those tissues will then become organs. An organ has to contain 2 or more tissues that perform specialized functions. There are 4 different types of tissue, right? We have epithelial, connective, muscle, and nervous, right? So epithelial, people will think a lot about the skin. Why? Because of its ability to absorb, right? But we can also find epithelial in our digestive system, right? Connective tissue, very simply, we have that word to connect, right? So for instance, bones can be considered a type of connective tissue. Why? Because it's connecting, right, my thumb to my wrist. Muscle tissue, right? We have 3 types. We have smooth muscle, we have skeletal muscle, and we have cardiac muscle. And then nervous tissue is the tissue that is going to be utilized by our nervous system. Of course, in order for something to become an organ, these types of tissues need to be present. Why? Because all of our organs are going to perform functions from each tissue. So here's a cross section of the leg so that you can kind of see all of them together. Right here, over here, we have skeletal muscle, right? That's going to allow me to contract. Here we have the nerve. That is going to tell me to contract, right? The skin is acting, or epithelial tissue is acting as, a protective layer and an absorbent layer even, right? We have superficial fascia, a type of connective tissue that we're good friends with, and deeper fascia, right? We have bone. We have all sorts of things, right? So here we can see we have that muscle type of tissue. We have epithelial tissue, we have nervous tissue, and we have connective tissue, all in just a section of the leg. They are working together. Of course, we have other things playing a factor. We have arteries, veins, ligaments, the periosteum, right? But right now, the biggest importance for you to understand is that these 4 tissues are just always working together. Why? Because they perform different functions that the organism needs as a whole. If there's a problem with one of the functions, there's going to be a problem with the organism. This is now we're going to discuss interstitial fluid, right? This is fluid in extracellular spaces, right? So this is in between tissues. We have fluid, and it's going to bathe the cell and help transportation for nutrients, gases, and waste, right? That interstitial fluid is probably what we're interacting with on a daily basis as massage therapists, right? Interstitial fluid can, of course, include blood, plasma, lymph, and is chemically similar, right? They are all kind of chilling, floating around, making sure that our body isn't freaking out, right? The interstitial fluid is a bit more abundant than the plasma or the lymph. Here is a bit of more embryologic tissue layers, right? So embryologic, I wonder what that could be. I'll let you figure it out, right? So we have the ectoderm. The ectoderm is the outermost layer of that tissue, right? It's going to help contain, for instance, with nervous tissue, the special senses and the epidermis. We have the mesoderm. This is in the middle, which is going to consider things like muscles and connective tissue. We have endoderm, the innermost layer, right? Helping things like epithelial tissue, lining the body's cavities, passages, and internal organs. Here is the embryologic tissue layers. I hope you guys do your due diligence to find out I'm not necessarily talking about babies. Right, so here is a bit of an example, right? We have the ectoderm, which is a bit showing kind of what's outside, the mesoderm and the endoderm. Here in the ectoderm, we can kind of see the person, the skin, all of those things, right? And this is going a little bit far out just to explain even more so a bit on that cellular level and that tissue level, right? So the ectoderm is going to, of course, contain things like epithelial tissue, right? Once we have that mesoderm, we're going deeper inside and we're thinking, I can see your skeleton, I can see your muscles, I can see all of those things, right? But I can't necessarily see all of your organs. That I can see in the endoderm. Epithelial tissue, right? This is going to line or cover external or internal body structures, right? These are lines that, can open and close body cavities. It's going to help with certain functions, right? So this is the physiology part of it, right? It's going to provide protection, absorption, secretion, excretion, and sensation. I can feel. Why? Because my epithelial tissue and my nervous tissue work together to help me feel. There's a couple of classifications of epithelial tissue, right? So for instance, if it's one cell thick, right? So we're thinking like a thin sheet of paper, that is going to be simple. If it's a couple more sheets of paper, that is going to be stratified, 2 or more cells thick, right? If it's flat shaped, right? Like a sheet of paper, it can be also squamous, right? So simple squamous is going to be one sheet of paper, right? But simple stratified is, right, very, very small, right? So 2 or more cells thick, but it is just one layer, right? Now, cuboidal, I can have simple cuboidal, right? So it looks like a cube, right? That's a type of epithelial cell that looks like a cube. Right, under a microscope, it's going to look a little bit more like a blob, but, for the sake of conversation, this is cube-shaped, right? A simple, cuboidal structure is just that one cube, right? Maybe it could span across several layers, but it is just that one cube of thickness, right? Columnar, column-shaped, right? So we have columnar, column-shaped. Pseudostratified, kind of it gaslights us, guys. What do I mean by this is going to gaslight us? Pseudo, I want you to guys put it in my head and in your head, right? That pseudo is going to mean fake. So it's fake stratified. So for instance, sometimes you'll have cells that are kind of giving that they have more than one layer, but they really don't. It's just one layer. It's oddly shaped, so it looks like more than one. So fake stratified, right? And then transitional is going to combine all the cell shapes. Here is a bit of a better picture. I know my drawings are really whack, right? But here you can actually see it. Here we have, the pseudo-stratified. If I look closely, I only have one nucleus for every, cell. It's not like it's stacked. If it were stacked, for instance, with the stratified squamous, right, there's 1, 2, 3, right, everything is stacked on top of each other, right? Now with that bladder cell, we can kind of see there's many different shapes. Looks like columns, looks like cubes, can't really tell what it is, so it is definitely transitional, right? Now, simple columnar, we're going to see that more so in the digestive tract, right, where we have columns that are going to help line our intestines, right? The ovarian surface is going to be known as simple cuboidal. It's actually very thin layer of epithelial tissue. And then for the lungs, we have simple squamous, right? So here you can see that small sheet of cells. Connective tissue. This is going to provide the framework for our organs, right? So it's going to keep things together. It's going to connect together. I'm the connective tissue of my family. I keep it together. I make sure everyone's okay, right? And it's going to form the framework for the organs and the glands, as well as the body as a whole. They're going to help us do things, like for instance, it's going to provide transportation and defense. It's going to protect us, connect, and support other tissues. Fibroblasts, right here, that's an important key word. Fibroblasts are precursor cells that help form protein fibers, right? So I eat fiber. Sometimes I have a fiber 1 bar, and I can see that, but that fiber 1 bar has protein, right? Fibroblasts, try to think of fiber 1 bars that have protein. I know it's a lot of information to grasp very quickly, right? So be aware. Right? Fibroblasts are precursors to help produce protein filaments, right? Those are going to help and contribute to things such as wound healing and repair. Connective tissue has 4 types, right? We have fibrous tissue, bone, cartilage, and then liquid connective tissue. Liquid connective tissue could be like our lymph, right? Blood supply, of course, is going to vary depending on what that specific type of connective tissue needs, right? And that could influence the healing rate. For instance, the dermis muscle, right? This is a highly vascularized, right, location, and it heals very quickly. Why? I can't just have a gash on my arm and walk around it like nothing is going to happen. No, my body recognizes I need healing there and I need it quickly, right? So when we think about the dermis, right, especially like where that connective tissue could be, it's going to heal a lot quicker. Now, with tendons and ligaments, right, it has low vasculature, so not much blood is going in that area. Why? Because it's keeping bones together, right? Or muscles connecting to bones, right? And this is going to heal slowly. That's why, I can recover from a gash on my arm relatively quickly and get back to work. But if I sprain my ankle or I tear my ligament or my tendon, I'm going to be out of work for quite some time, right? Why? Because it heals very slowly because it has low vasculature. Cartilage has little or no vascularity, so there's a possibility if your cartilage does, the faja, and like it's going to fail you, right? That it cannot heal. That is why things like osteoporosis, degenerative bone disease does not heal. It only degenerates even more towards time. We can slow the process, but we cannot heal it. So here is a bit of a better picture than what I was drawing, right? So for instance, for dense regular, we have our, ligaments, of course, right, is a good example of dense, regular, or fibrous connective tissue, right? Bone, of course, it's going to be located where? In our bones. Cartilage, right? This is a nice example of the hyaline cartilage. It looks a little weird, right? But I promise what it's doing is it's connecting our ribs together, making sure everything stays put. We have loose fibrous, right, upon the skin. Adipose, right? Adipose tissue is fat tissue, right? So these are some fat cells. They are also fibrous. Loose is fibrous, adipose is fibrous, right? Be aware. Right, now adipose tissue is going to have several functions. One of the functions is going to be for insulation. It keeps us warm. I like being a little chunky because in the winter I don't have a problem. Right, then we have our reticular fibrous, which is going to be found inside the bone marrow. It's going to have much more, help in the sense of like creating blood cells. A little more on fibrous connective tissue. We have different types. For instance, we have loose, which is like an elastic glue, adipose, which is flat, reticular, which is going to help support framework, dense regular for tendons and ligaments, and dense irregular, which is for fascia. Right? Now, fibrous connective tissue is going to support, attach, right, things to one another. It's going to fill the space in between structures, so our organs, the things inside our body aren't literally, floating around, and I don't rattle like a maraca every time I walk, right? This is also going to help keep things, of course, in their proper place. So I'm not a maraca. Bone, this is the hardest connective tissue. Of course, it is making up most of the skeletal system. Then we have compact bone, which is hard on the outer shell, and spongy bone, which is thin, right? Spongy bone, it's going to give the appearance of a sponge, right? And specifically, that appearance of the sponge is recognized as thin lattice work beams, but as long as you understand that, compact is hard and spongy isn't that hard, it's thinner, you're good. We have different types of cartilage. For instance, hyaline cartilage, not to be pronounced as Hialeah cartilage, right? This is an elastic, rubbery, and smooth cartilage. It's going to cover surfaces of the bone, connect the ribs to the sternum and in the nose, right? It's going to help, our nose be a nose. If I move my nose around, I can feel my hyaline cartilage. My trachea is going to be covered by hyaline cartilage, and even small respiratory tubes are going to be covered by hyaline cartilage. We have fibrocartilage, which is a strong and durable type of cartilage. This is going to be found in the vertebrae and the knee. We have elastic cartilage, which is soft and pliable, so I can move it around, right, which is going to be more so in the external nose and the ears, as well as the larynx. Blood is a liquid type of connective tissue. Why? Because the blood's going to go everywhere, and it kind of connects everything to everything. Why? Because if I run out of blood in a specific area of my body, that is a very dangerous situation for me to be in. We know that just based off of life, that if I have no blood going to my pinky, I might need to cut my pinky off, right? So this is going to include red and white blood cells, as well as platelets and plasma, and the transport respiratory gases, nutrients, as well as waste products. The muscle types, very, very important, especially for future knowledge of kinesiology. We have 3 muscle types. We have skeletal, cardiac, and smooth, right? Skeletal is going to attach to the bones. It helps move my skeletal system. It's cylindrical, thread-like even, and can contain several nuclei, right? If it's located peripherally, It is also voluntary. I can decide to move my arm, right? I can decide to do squats. I can decide to pick my nose if I wanted to. Those are all voluntary movements. Now, the heart itself, specifically, or cardiac muscle, is going to be located in the heart. Now, their shape is a little different. They're going to have more of a Y or H shape, and they are involuntary. I don't go, oh no, I'm going to stop my heart real quick, and then my heart stops. No, even if I want to stop my heart, I really can't, right? Because it is an involuntary process. Now, smooth muscle is going to be located in hollow organs as well as tubes. They can be long or narrow and spindle shaped, right? So there's more of a variety of what smooth muscle can really look like, but this is also involuntary. I don't decide on my own that, hey, stomach, I need you to digest this real quick because I'm going to go out. No, my stomach is going to digest when it needs to digest. It is involuntary. Here is where they are located. So for instance, cardiac muscle and skeletal muscle will always have striations, right? So these are like little lines on the muscle that, they show that they're, they can contract, they can do everything they want, right? But we can see those striations. If there are no striations, then it's smooth muscle, right? And smooth muscle, for instance, in this case, it's showing the smooth muscles of the intestines. However, here for the skeletal muscle, it seems to be taking a picture from the biceps, and we can see several striations as well as several little nuclei kind of popping its head out. Whereas with cardiac muscle, we see less nuclei. Nervous tissue. The cells of the nervous tissue are also known as neurons, right? But there are several different types of neuronic cells, right? This is located in the brain, spinal cord, and nerves, right? These cells are called neurons, and the parts are going to include, of course, are the cell body, right? So this is going to contain the nucleus, the organelles, like we mentioned earlier, dendrites, right? These are going to transmit impulses to the cell body. Axons are going to go away from the body, right? So it's going to transmit those impulses away. Dendrites are going to. Some are surrounded by what is known like the myelin sheath. The myelin sheath is like a little protective layer to protect our neurons. If something happens to this sheath of protection for the neurons, that's a really big problem. You can develop things like multiple sclerosis, for instance, if you do not have that beautiful myelin sheath. And it's going to increase, of course, impulse conduction rate and prevent impulse leakage. So, for instance, if there's that myelin sheath keeps that, nerve impulse, right? That energy that it just received. It's going to keep it along the nerve so that information gets to where it needs to go. But if it doesn't have that protective sheath, it can just kind of go somewhere else by accident. That is the importance of the myelin sheath. Here is an example of, right, the nerve cell. So for instance, here we have the cell body showing us, all the beautiful stuff of a nerve cell. Here, these little beautiful tree branches are dendrites, so they're going to go elsewhere. Here is the axon, and then over here, right, that yellow jacket upon the axon is known as a myelin sheath. Tissue repair, right? So tissues, of course, can be damaged, right? I take a stumble, I fall, or I get really, really sick, and that tissue can become damaged. And there's a couple of steps to be aware of in tissue repair. There are a couple of steps, right? So we have inflammation, regeneration, and remodeling. Inflammation, of course, an itis, I can see it swelling. Regeneration, everything is kind of replicating and trying to, do what it needs to do so that I reach, what I need to reach for balance in that area. And remodeling, finally, it's getting those, beautiful repaired cells are putting what I need, what it just created more of, back into place to remodel the area that was damaged. So inflammation, as we just talked about a little bit, that's a protective response, right? It's trying to stop more damage from happening, right? And it's going to be a bit of an inflammation, right? It's going to swell up, and this can be caused due to infection and trauma. I can hit my arm really, really bad and hurt my wrist, and my wrist will inflame. Or for instance, I can get certain types of diseases, and then I'll have a different type of inflammation, right? This is going to eliminate pathogens or foreign agents to, come in. And it's also going to help and remove damaged tissues and create an environment that helps for tissue repair. So think about it almost like, if someone were to get injured in real life, everyone isn't going to swarm around them. Some people will, but there is always going to be one person that tells everyone to back up. I'm a doctor, I'm a nurse, I know what I'm doing, I need to help, I need space for the person that's injured, right? So that is the inflammation. I'm creating space for that person to be injured. And then I'll call on people in the crowd, hey, I need you to get me this. I need you to get me that. For instance, when as a class we took CPR, if we are 4 rescuers, right? If there's 15 people surrounding the person having a heart attack, that person is going to die, right? But if one person takes charge and goes, hey, I need space, you get the AED, you call 911, I'm going to perform compressions, you're going to help me with the breaths. Boom. We have space so that everybody can get to that rescue operation, right? That rescue mission of protecting the person who just had a heart attack. Inflammation is a little bit like that if you really think about it. Why? Because it's going to create space, right? Hey, foreign objects, people who aren't involved, go away, right? Pathogens, go away. Create the space. Everything go away. My helpers come in. They come in, and then they start to maximize that tissue repair. Local inflammation is contained to a very specific area. It's only happening in that one area. It's not my full body, right? And this is characterized by swelling, heat, a loss of function, redness, and pain. This is also going to be known as SHARP, right? It's a beautiful acronym to help remember. Swelling, heat, a loss of function, redness, and pain. And it's not going to last a whole lifetime. No, this can last approximately 4 days after the initial onset. And this is also known as acute inflammation, right? So for acute, I like to think of a cute baby, right? A cute little baby is, sleeping, and cute little baby is only 4 days old, right? Now, it's not necessarily going to be, right, for instance, chronic, right, where we think more of an adult. An adult is more likely to have chronic pain. Child more likely to have acute pain, right? Acute inflammation, very small inflammation, right? It's not in the sense that the inflammation itself is small, but as long it doesn't take that long to heal that inflammation. It's a short duration. So here are, this is the cute little, not totem pole, but the little statues of the signs and symptoms of inflammation, right? So of course we have swelling, heat, a loss of function, right? Redness and pain. Regeneration, right? That's a growth of new function, right? A new functional tissue after it is damaged. We have fibroblasts, which are going to help stimulate collagen production. They help wounds close and make sure that that site is sterile, and creates netting for granulation tissues to form. Now, a scar is fibrous tissue resulting from the damage, right? And it can lead to things like adhesions. An adhesion, of course, is an abnormal sticking of tissue layers, and that can restrict movement. As massage therapists, we can actually help a little bit out, people out in that term, right? We can help massage certain types of scar tissues and adhesions to help return movement when there was restrictive movement. Here's a little bit more on tissue repair and healing, right? So this is, for instance, a blood clot, right? And we can see the epithelium kind of working overtime and the connective tissue to work overtime, right? So they're like, damn, like we just got, right? We have this open wound and we need to close it, right? So the clot itself will stay there, but then we can see the fibroblast here kind of knitting away at that injury. And it's going to go all the way up to close that epithelial tissue. Right, once it starts to close, right, that connective tissue is going to form a scar, and on top we have that freshly healed epithelium. There are certain factors that can affect tissue repair. For instance, the healthier you are, the better you are when it comes to bouncing back. But if I'm very, poor nutrition level, it's going to take me longer to heal. If I have a lack of circulation, blood, and lymph, it's going to take me longer to heal. Why? Because the factors that affect tissue repair are things like nutrition, things like circulation, especially, the condition of the wound. Is the wound getting infected? Is it not getting infected? What is the type of tissue that was hurt? Remember earlier we were talking about how there are certain tissues that once they are damaged, depending on the vascularity, it's going to take longer or less time to heal. That tendon, that ligament is going to take way longer to heal than, for instance, right, if I just were to cut the epithelial tissue on my skin, right? Now, the rate of cell division and, of course, blood supply will affect it. And, of course, age is going to affect tissue repair. We have different types of membranes, right? So membranes are going to be, right, soft, pliable sheets of tissue that cover and protect internal and external surfaces. These are the lining tubes and anchoring structures, right? They're helping us out. And they're going to secrete lubricating fluids, right? They are classified by a predominant tissue type, whether that is epithelial tissue or connective tissue, right? So the epithelial membrane is going to be recognized as cutaneous, mucus, and serous, whereas the connective tissue membrane is going to be known as synovial and meningeal. Common types of membranes, of course, the cutaneous is going to cover external body surfaces like the skin. Mucus is going to open body cavities. Serous is going to line closed body cavities. Synovial is going to line cavities between bones and joints. Meningeal is going to line spaces within the dorsal cavity, right, so back cavity, brain, as well as spinal cord. Here is what that looks like. So, for instance, we have the mucous membrane. We can see it up here where the nose is, right? That's why, when I have snot and I'm so cute, I'm literally excreting mucus from my nose, right? Whereas the serous membrane, these are the membranes lining certain organs, right? So, for instance, we have the parietal pleura, the visceral pleura, right? Those are lining my lungs. And then finally, we have the synovial membranes helping me with our synovial joints, and it's secreting synovium. The body compass. This is going to help determine directions, positions, and locations. So we have anatomical position. Anatomical position, of course, is, right, our human body. My face is going to be straight. Right, my palms are going to be facing forward. My legs are going to be a little bit far apart, but my feet are also going to be facing forward, right? Anatomical position was created so that while we're talking with other people within the medical field, we're all thinking and looking at the body from the same position. It would be so confusing if I didn't do this, if I did not think about it like this at all, right? How would I know what you're telling me? You're looking at the front of the body, but when I'm looking at the picture that you sent me, what? Like, all I can see are booty cheeks. What do you mean that's the front of the body? Right? Because that is very subjective. But now if you sent me something and you're like, hey, I'm looking at this an anatomical position, and I want you to look, in front of the body, right? Then I completely know what you're talking about. The body planes are going to divide the body so that we know our left and our right, as well as, up, down, all of that. Our directional terms are more so the up, down, my bad. And then the body cavities are what's inside certain areas of the body. We have the abdominal quadrants and regions, as well as the body regions. So here is a nice, beautiful picture of anatomical position, right? Big emphasis on the palms being forward and the feet being forward, right? As well as, our person isn't looking to the side or looking down. No, they're looking straight ahead. Their feet are hip distance left apart, so there's a slight space between the legs. And of course, the thumbs should be at the side, and the arms as well should be at their side. Here are the body planes, right? They're transparent flat planes that are going to divide the body into 3 dimensions, right? It's going to divide the body from up and down, left and right, front and back. The cardinal planes, meaning the main ones that you need to know, are sagittal, frontal, and transverse. Sagittal plane is the median plane, right? It's going to bisect the body front to back, creating left and right sections. A mid-sagittal plane is going to run directly through the middle of the body, right? So straight shot through the body, dividing left and right. Frontal, or otherwise known as coronal plane, is going to bisect the body into a side to side it's going to divide the body front and back. Sagittal, left and right. Frontal is going to divide front and back, right? Or coronal. Transverse, otherwise known as horizontal plane, is going to divide the body in between up and down, right? So it's going to cut me in half, my top part and my bottom part. Right, so here is a bit of a picture, right? So our transverse plane, of course, cut our person in half, right? Our mid-sagittal plane is dividing perfectly, right, in the middle, left and right. Now, here we have an example of a sagittal plane where it's not necessarily a mid-sagittal. It's just mostly cutting off, I want to say, like 2/3 of the leg, so that we can maybe see and look at a pathology maybe in that area, right? Frontal is going to divide front and back. Directional terms, right? Left is going to mean left, right? That's the subject's left. It's located left of the body. Right is going to mean right. It's located on the right side of the body, right? Superior is above. Inferior is below. Anterior is the front and posterior is the back. Medial is closer to the midline. It's closer to the middle. Medial, middle, right? Lateral is farther away from the middle. So it's going away from that midline. Ipsilateral is on the same side of the body, and contralateral is on the opposite side of the body. Proximal is nearer to the point of reference, which is usually towards the trunk of the body, and distal is going to be farther from the point of reference. So distal's away, there's distance, that is distal. Superficial is, of course, closer to the top, outside or external surfaces, and deep is deeper inside the body, within the body. The body cavities, right? These are hollow spaces in larger structures, right? There are main cavities. We, for instance, have the dorsal cavity. The dorsal cavity is going to contain the brain and spinal cavity. Dorsal, right? So, for instance, in the ocean, right? This is how I remember it. There's dolphins and sharks. That fin that's on their back is a dorsal fin. Dorsal, you want to think towards your back. It's our dorsal fin. Ventral cavity, right? We have 2 cavities in this area. We have the thoracic cavity, which is going to contain the heart, lungs, and structures of the mediastinum. And then we have the abdominopelvic cavity, right? So abdomen, pelvic It's going to contain the digestive system, reproductive, and urinary organs. Here are the different body cavities, right? So here you can see abdominal and pelvic. So together we call them the abdominopelvic. In between that we have the diaphragm, and then up here we have the thoracic cavity. We have our cranial cavity, which is going to contain what? Our brain. And we have our spinal cavity containing our spinal cord, our thoracic cavity, right? As we can see, contains our lungs. The abdominal quadrants and regions, right? Now the abdomen can be divided into some regions, and these regions are going to help kind of locate what organs are where. And it's best to know these for everyday life in case you get sick. Right, so the quadrant, for instance, right, is one horizontal line and one vertical line that intersects at your belly button, or otherwise known as the umbilicus. It's going to divide the abdomen into 4 sections. The regions, there are 2 horizontal and 2 vertical lines, and this is going to divide the abdomen kind of like you're doing a tic-tac-toe game of 9 regions. So here is what this looks like. Excuse me, I really needed a sip of water. All right, so here we have the right upper quadrant, the left upper quadrant, right lower, and left lower. And these are the specific regions, right? So for instance, we have the right hypochondriac, the epigastric, the left hypochondriac, the umbilical, the left lumbar, the right iliacal or inguinal, hypogastric, and left iliac inguinal, right? There are, that doesn't say everything I want it to say, so my apologies, right? I'm going to focus a little bit more onto probably the most important abdominal regions. For instance, in the hypogastric, of course, we're going to have like our, for women, our uteruses are going to be here, our urinary bladder is going to be here. In the inguinal areas, left and right inguinal, we'll have our ovaries. Some people, as far as muscle goes, right, this is where you're going to have a bit of the psoas. Now, in the umbilical region, that's where we're having more so that intestines, right? And when we massage, we're kind of massaging from the colon from left to right, to be able to manipulate the intestines, right? Now, towards the left hypochondriac and the epigastric, that's where the stomach is going to be. And those regions are very helpful in the future, especially if you get sick, so that you can actually tell your doctor, hey, I'm having pain in this epigastric region of mine, so they know. Here are the body regions. This can be divided regionally. Of course, we have the axial region, which is going to contain the head, neck, torso, and trunk, as well as the appendicular regions, which are going to contain the upper extremities. Right? Appendicular, I want to make a note. Appendicular is going to contain your appendages. Right? Axial, we have an axis, right? The Earth spins on an axis, right? So if I'm looking at the Earth, there's like an invisible line through it and it's going to spin. We have an axis, right? That's our brain. We cut straight through the center. That's going to help us, right? If spin technically if I wanted to, right? This is going to contain like the head, neck, and torso, whereas the appendicular region, the appendage regions, are your upper extremities and lower extremities. So your appendages, your arms, forearms, hands, thighs, legs, feet. Here are a little bit more anatomical terms, specifically for the axial region. Cephalic is going to mean your head. Cranial is going to mean the upper skull. Temporal is going to be the side skull. Facial, of course, that's your face. Orbital is going to be your eye. Frontal is going to be your forehead. Zygomatic is the upper cheek. Nasal is the nose. Buccal is the cheek within the the cheek wall within the mouth, and oral, of course, is your mouth. For the axial region, otic is going to mean your ear. Mandibular is your lower jaw. Occipital is the lower back of the skull. Cervical is the neck. Thoracic is the chest, the area between the neck and diaphragm. And abdominal is, of course, your abdomen, the superior region of the abdominopelvic cavity. Pelvic, of course, is referring to your pelvis or the inferior region of that cavity. Pectoral is the breast area or the upper anterior thorax. Costal are your ribs. Umbilical, think of your umbilical cord. This is your belly button. Vertebral is your spinal column, and sacral is your sacrum. Coccygeal is the bottom of the spinal column or the coccyx area, so that tailbone that we see in class. Lumbar is the lower back or loin region between the ribs and the hips. Gluteal is your booty. Buttocks formed by gluteal muscles. Sacroiliac is that area between the sacrum and the pelvic bones, and perineal is between your anus and your genitals. For your upper extremities, we have clavicular, which is your collarbone, acromial, which is the top of the shoulder. Scapular is your shoulder blade. That word shoulder blade will no longer exist in my class, by the way. Deltoid is that beautiful curve of the shoulder formed by the deltoid muscle. Axillary is your armpit. Brachial is your arm, and it is between the shoulder and the elbow, and antebrachial is your forearm, right? And anterior, brachial, right? Anterior, brachial, right? Forearm, between your wrist and elbow. Cubital is going to refer to your elbow. Antecubital, right? So the front of the elbow, anterior cubital. The carpal is your wrist. The palmar is your palm. The pollex is your thumb. The digital are the fingers or the toes. So give me your digits. How are you going to dial your digits on my phone? With your fingers. Lower extremities. Your groin, of course, is the area between your thigh and abdomen. The pubic is the genital area over the pubic symphysis. The coxal is your hip. Femoral is typically the thigh, referring to that femur between the hip and knee. Patellar is your kneecap. Popliteal is that posterior knee, right? Posterior knee. Crural is the leg between the knee and ankle. The calf, of course, is the posterior leg. Tarsal is your ankle. In the hand, we have carpals. In the feet, we have tarsals. Very similar, very easy to remember. Pedal, I put gas, I put the gas to the pedal or the pedal to the gas, one or the other, right? But I do that with what? My foot. So pedal is going to mean foot or feet. Calcaneal is the heel. Dorsum is the top of your foot. Plantar is the bottom or sole of your foot. Hallux is the great toe. In the hand, it's pollux. In the feet is hallux. Digital is the toes or fingers. Thank you. Hope you guys ask questions when you need to. And without any further ado, I'm going to sign off. Thank you.